Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from Arizona, USA, Rebecca Murtagh. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ash. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Rebecca is the Chief Executive Officer of the Human AI Institute. She's a futurist, author, and speaker. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors, so we'll talk about her book, Crowd Success and Unleash Your Genius. So, Rebecca, before we start talking about the Human AI Institute, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
And thank you for asking, because I think that gives context to what I'm doing right now more than anything. So I'm very fortunate. I've had a very accomplished career. I've enjoyed travel. I've met amazing people. I've worked with really brilliant humans. I've been able to travel and really have the means to do almost anything that I want to invest my time and energy in, which is a blessing. But it wasn't always that way. Like everyone, I have my own journey and how we got there. I was raised to believe that you had to have a college degree to be successful, and worked very, very hard in school, got into college, and was a very good student, honor student on Dean's List every semester. I was about to go into my junior year of college, and then I had a near fatal car accident.
Oh, God.
Everything stopped, and I lost everything I had. It was really devastating because I didn't have the means to return back to school, and my mom and dad didn't want to fill out the forms required by the government to get financial aid. So my college career was over.
Wow.
And that left me feeling like I was never going to be successful, because I bought into that mindset. I'd spent my whole life gearing up for this college career. I wanted to have this career and have a degree. And I just felt that was it. I was not going to. And it was, this was back in the 80s. So college degrees were very preferred, required actually at the time. And I didn't really know what to do. I just started working again as soon as I could. It took a long time to recover from all of the other stuff. And then I realized at one point that if I wasn't going to be able to go to college, I wasn't going to let that define me. So I really started applying myself and looking for opportunities to use what I learned in college to try. Now, I did try and get work in my field, but I couldn't even get an interview without the bachelor's degree. So I started getting creative, and I did end up getting work in the field and worked my way up, and I ended up replacing the director that hired me. And so I was very, very aggressive. And then at a certain point, I was working for a big corporation, and this was in the 90s now, and the internet was starting to become a thing. And the corporation I was working for started building their first 3 or 4 websites. They had multiple divisions, and I jumped in to see if I could get involved, and that put wheels in motion, and I got really excited about it. And I just saw that as that's where I wanted to put all my eggs in that basket. That's where I wanted my future to be. So I really got excited about the internet. I left the stability of a very nice corporate job with benefits and 401k, all the retirement, everything you could imagine. And I took a pay cut to work in a new media startup, and my parents thought I was nuts. And it was the best decision I ever made. It was a very innovative environment. There was a very diverse group of people there, very collaborative. And I learned so much because we just learned from each other. I had a different background than everyone else there. And that really started that career for me. And 2 jobs later, I had headhunters contacting me because that knowledge was so rare in the 90s for e-commerce. E-commerce wasn't even really called e-commerce yet. Shopping carts were just being invented.
Correct.
Just to put a date stamp on that. And so that knowledge of anything doing in the internet was very, very valuable. So I had headhunters calling me, offering me $250,000 salaries plus equity and benefits. And I was like, what? So that was very flattering, but I was a mom at the time and I really didn't want to move to New York City and raise him in the city. I just knew I wouldn't see him. I would be working a lot. So I made a life choice and I worked for another corporation. I ended up working for a Fortune 500 and I helped them. They needed my expertise in e-commerce. So I helped them launch their first $1 million budget website, which is why I called my first book $1 Million Websites. So I used a lot of that information and what I had applied over the years to write that book. But the next phase, just, I worked for another corporation, publicly traded tech company, learned a lot in both organizations, but I really just wasn't being able to do everything I wanted to do. So that's when I started my business. And so that put everything else in motion. So that's kind of how I got where I am now.
What an amazing, and the word pivot has just come into the startup lingo, but you seem to have pivoted several times in your career ever since your accident. And wonderful to see you so well established despite that near fatal accident you spoke about. So, Rebecca, let's now talk about the Human AI Institute. From technology and websites and all the other stuff, what got you interested in artificial intelligence? And then we'll talk about becoming a futurist.
So human AI, I'm very interested in technology. I've always been an early adopter, and artificial intelligence has been around for a very long time.
Correct.
And in doing some of the work that I've done over the last 20 years, I've been a student of data and algorithms, and AI has been a part of that, machine learning, etc. Then as the business evolved, I evolved, and it became time to pivot again. And human AI really isn't what people the way I use it anyway, isn't the way people think it is. I really, the purpose of calling for AI or human AI, human artificial intelligence, is to help people understand that success is not a solo journey, even though society kind of raises us to believe that. I even talked about my own journey. I was kind of figuring it out on my own, right? I think a lot of us do, but no one is successful on their own. Correct. And we don't think about it that way. But if we can shift our thinking just a little bit, even how we approach our personal success, how we approach being an entrepreneur, how we approach getting funding, how we approach working, we don't have to be isolated in that journey. In fact, we shouldn't be, because we are successful faster when we work together. And so human AI, the objective of it is that humans can achieve their goals faster when they collaborate the way that machine artificial intelligence does, in that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the science has actually proved many, many times over the years that when we can put a cognitively diverse group in a room, and it doesn't matter, there's a lot of things that we talk about today that really just don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter what race, religion, gender, anything, age does not matter, but you want cognitive diversity, and it's very different. So when you can have a diversity of thought, that's where the sweet spot is, and helping people be more collaborative, and the solution, the problem solving is much more creative, and there'll always be a better solution than a bunch of people in the room that, groupthink is the opposite of human AI.
Very interesting, because and I think you've answered what would have been my next question. I said, because I was going to ask you, human and artificial intelligence seem to be a contradiction, but I think you've answered it from the perspective of large groups of people working together and collaborating. My next question is on your mission statement. It is fascinating to read your mission statement, which is to empower executives, entrepreneurs, and leaders with a proprietary framework based on science and proven methods to accelerate growth, turn disruption into opportunity, create sustainable success, and enjoy more harmony, joy, and fulfillment in their professional and personal life. Help me understand this, because you talk about professional and personal. You talk about joy and fulfillment. You talk about success and harmony. And a lot of these could be on opposite sides of the fence.
Exactly, because we've been conditioned to think that. And I think that's where we get in our own way. A lot of our limiting beliefs come from that friction that really doesn't need to stop us. It actually should help us shift to the next level. And so when we understand the dynamic of, that's why human AI is part of that core. But you mentioned the two books. It actually was one book, but it got too big. So I turned Crowd Success is basically human AI and explains the collaborative process, and that's how we accelerate success. But I go into depth in the book explaining the science of how integral each individual is. No one is more valuable or less valuable than any other contributor in the process. And I give a lot of examples and explain the science behind that. I do talk about things like quantum mechanics. I just touch on them a little bit because they are at the core of why we can't look at these things as being opposing forces, because I think we've been conditioned to think that. Correct. And then when we understand that, and that's why the next book is Unleash Your Genius, because without each person coming forth with their gifts and their talent and being able to be their authentic self and fulfilling their potential, crowd success or human AI doesn't work. So they're very tightly woven. And when we understand all of that, and we can look at the people we meet in the elevator, the person we meet at the market, the person we're sitting next to on a plane, we don't know where that next opportunity might come from. You never know. It might be 5 years down the road. You may not even know that person had a part in what happens next. But we are so connected. Everyone in the world is connected. And I explain that. But when we understand that helps us not only look at ourselves differently, but everyone we encounter suddenly has we look at it through a different lens, and everyone has a different role. Because with quantum mechanics, we're made of atoms, and atoms in quantum entanglement are permanently impacted by one another forever. And when one changes, the other one changes. Correct. So when we look at ourselves being tons of atoms, that we can understand when we interact with someone, I'll always remember our conversation, Ash, because now we've touched one another in a certain way, and there's other people that will pop into this conversation, observe it, and everyone will take something slightly different away from it. And then that will play into how they approach their work, their family, their community, what they're doing when they go home at night. So that's why I include the personal and the professional, because we are whole beings. We don't just stop being us when we go home from work, right?
Well said. Well said. Let me now move to your other avatar as a futurist. For my viewers and listeners, help me understand, what does a futurist do?
Well, the simplest way to describe a futurist is someone that can predict or see things that are coming in the future. It's interesting because a lot of people are really intimidated by that. And it really takes a lot of guts to put your name next to the word futurist. And I only can because one of my clients gave it to me first. And he confirmed it again recently. And he gave it to that title to me almost 20 years ago. And we had a recent conversation, and he confirmed again that he truly believes that that's where my talent lies. But here's the thing, being a futurist is part knowledge, part intuition, and part courage.
Correct.
So I think anyone can be a futurist. And I really encourage people to step into that. And that's why I call myself an innovation coach, right? Because I feel that, you mentioned pivot. You're very observant of you, Ash, because I have pivoted so many times. But I've also helped other organizations pivot.
Hmm.
Disruption is inevitable. Things are going to change. We're in a very disruptive time in the world right now. You know, the economy and politics and
Correct.
everything you can imagine. There's always going to be upheaval. So we have to make a choice. Do we want to disrupt or be disrupted? So when we understand how to look into the future and build strategies and identify emerging trends, anyone can be a futurist. It just takes the guts to do something about it. And a lot of people are afraid to do that. And that's why I'm trying to step into that and help other people see that they can do it too. They can do it.
And for my, again, viewers and listeners, can you share one or two interesting, if I can use the word in inverted commas, predictions that you made, which came true?
Well, I think, well, see, well, my predictions are always through action.
Absolutely.
So what I do is identify a trend and convince a client, or sometimes myself or my team or a friend, to act on what is coming. And probably the most, if you're looking for a business case, the most powerful example is a client that came to me from New York City. They had a transportation company, and they were in a price war going down with their competitor. They both kept lowering their price, and there was no differentiation between the services. And so, you know, I was really just thinking we have to do something different. And I just started, you know, trying to figure out what can we do for these folks and how do we differentiate them, because right now they're all losing money. So it was a price war. And I read an article about Google being able to provide Wi-Fi on their shuttle from San Francisco to Silicon Valley to their employees. That's not a very long distance. It can take a long time because it's California, you know, you got 5 or 7 lanes each way. And I thought that was brilliant. And I just had a little bit of a light bulb moment that, you know, what if we could do something like that for this client? It had never been done. This is long before Wi-Fi made it anywhere in a public space. It wasn't in a restaurant. It wasn't on a plane. It wasn't on a train. It wasn't in cars. It wasn't, this is 2004 or 2005. This is very, very early. And so I went to my technologist and I said, listen, this is what and he always had this smirk on his face. I loved him. I still love him. We're friends now. But I said, I have a question for you. He says, of course you do. And he says, you know what the answer is going to be? Yes, but how much is it going to cost? And, you know, do you want to pay it? Because everything is possible. And I'm like, okay, great answer. But I told him what I wanted to do. And he helped me figure out how to do it. So what we did was create a commercial solution for this company. And we had to convince the client that the demand would be there, that a rider would find that valuable. Because it's hard to go backwards in time, right? It's hard to imagine what that was like. But would that make a difference? Do people care about Wi-Fi? And back then we didn't have Wi-Fi on our phones even. So you have to really think way back. So people had to go on with their laptop, but would they choose that over a cheaper ticket if they had to pay a little bit more for Wi-Fi? And we did as much research as we could, but it had never been done. So we did it. And we designed the solution. My technologist installed the solution. We launched it. We did a big press event at the airport, the international airport. We had the media there come onto the bus, and we're kind of holding our breath. And they're there to try it out with their laptops, and it worked beautifully. And it ended up changing that business. They became a market leader. So not only were they able to increase their ticket price, but now that everyone would rather take that than their competitor. And it just really shifted their business significantly. So when I talk about accelerating growth, sometimes you have to be a little bold and do something that has never been done before. That's what innovation's all about. But they were very well. They had nothing to lose at that point. They had to do something. So I say they were brave, but it was out of necessity. And I try to encourage people to innovate before they get to, because that was a disruption, right? The price war was a disruption. So I try to encourage people, but human nature is we kind of wait until we don't have, until we have to do something.
I agree. Great response. Rebecca, let's now move to your book. books. I'm sorry, I got the two books mixed up as one, Crowd Success
No
and
apology. Yes.
Unleash Your Genius. But you also told me your first book was $1 Million Website.
Yes.
So before I ask you about any books, I'm assuming all of them are available on Amazon.
So $1 Million Websites has been available on Amazon since 2013. People are still buying it, which I wrote it to be evergreen. It's really about e-business strategy, about website strategy and how to plan for a website and communicate with a vendor and what a website is meant to do. Best practices from $1 million budget to nothing. And then the other two books, the Crowd Success is being released at the end of this year. And the other one will follow the beginning of 2023.
Okay.
And so they'll be back to back because they're so closely related.
Okay.
But yes, they will be available on Amazon.
It will be available. So I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check them out. I'll go and check them out myself. Is there any hypothesis that you had when you were looking at these two linked books of Crowd Success and Unleash Your Genius?
The hypothesis. Well, really I just go back to what I do and what drives me, because what I care about most is helping people achieve their goals and dreams, because at the end of the day, behind every desk is a human, behind every business are humans, and we all have something in us that we're trying to achieve. And that's what I get up every morning to do. And I get great joy from that. I've had the benefit of over 30 years of experience. I've invested so many hundreds, just thousands and thousands, over 100,000, I guess we calculated, over 100,000 hours. But it's experience and research and collaboration. And I'm trying to help people understand what works, but why it works.
Okay.
Because I think as humans, we're curious. We don't want to just be told what to do. We want to understand why it works. And we're very lucky at this moment in time because we didn't understand things like quantum entanglement not too far in the past. And it really does apply to how we can approach networking, how we can approach collaboration, how we approach our partnerships, investments. Everything we do becomes richer when we know that we'll get there faster when we work with other people.
Fascinating. I've got now time for one more question. And this question, Rebecca, is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own incredible journey and your love for technology and the fact that you're a futurist, what would you say are 3 lessons or 3 learnings you want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
Oh, great question, Ash. I think the first is be true to yourself. Find your passion, connect with it, because that's going to be what you're going to be best at. That is where you will excel. When your heart is involved, your work elevates and you're able to passionately contribute in a way no one else can. That is why you're here. You are on this earth for a very specific reason. And when we can embrace that, I think everyone, not just we benefit, but everyone around us benefits. And that's why I have the premise of the human AI at the base of it. I think, honestly, I'm just going to stick with that one because I really think that's kind of like my mission these days.
Absolutely. And on that note, and your incredible lesson, be true to yourself, find your passion, because I think that is what is going to drive us to reach what we have wanted to in our goals. Thank you, Rebecca, for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for talking to me about Human AI Institute and explaining human artificial intelligence. Thank you for talking to me about the Futurist and what you do as a futurist, and how a lot of the things that you are doing are there to really help people find their passion. And finally, thank you for talking to me about your books. Good luck for both your forthcoming books. Thank you for speaking to me, and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Ash. I appreciate the invitation. All the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.